Ask the Podcast Coach for May 19th, 2018.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is, that fun-filled music. That means it's 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com. And joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Cullison from the averageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Happy Royal Wedding Saturday morning. We are celebrating that. I'm sure our audience is flocking over there right now to go watch the Royal Wedding, whatever it is.
I was surprised. I guess it came on at 6 in the morning?
Yeah.
Because I saw people on Facebook going, are you getting up? And I'm like, there's a wedding? It's amazing when you don't listen to radio anymore and you barely watch TV. And if you do, it's on Hulu and it's recorded and you skip the commercials. There are so many things that I don't, I'm like, oh, really? That's this weekend? I knew they were getting married. I knew they were engaged because you can't go to the grocery store without seeing that kind of stuff.
You're looking at the magazines. YouTube's made a big deal about it. If you go up to YouTube right now, it says the Royal Wedding. In the right-hand corner, there's there's an icon for it. And if you click on it, it'll take you to their coverage. So they've made a big deal about this. YouTube has, and they're streaming it live. I bet they're getting millions to watch it that way. So good for them.
Yeah, it's yay. Rich people getting married to more rich people.
Wait a minute. Rich people who really don't even have a job and all they do is really represent a country. They're unelected and they have it because of the family relationship they have. It's the stupidest thing. Yeah. But they love their royals. They love their royalty.
If people didn't go over to see Buckingham Palace, they'd be like, all right, you're out, but it's a great touristy thing. So
I don't get it, but Mike Howard says rich people who never worked for a dime of it. Yeah, and they support it. That's the crazy thing. But it's been in place for hundreds and hundreds of years. So I imagine someday that would stop. That's the ultimate thing that you do that you don't know why you do it, but you do it because you've done it. And I think someday someone's going to go,
I think
maybe a beach house in Essex, and you're done.
I'm being corrected in the chat room. Rich is saying, Dave, it's Eastern Daylight Time. What did I say?
Probably Standard Time, I think is what you say. Eastern Standard Time.
Okay.
I would just say Eastern.
Eastern. There you go.
Yeah, that covers just about everything.
But the one thing we should mention before we forget, there's a thing going on today, live stream for thecure.com. This is the guys from, it's a movie podcast whose name is escaping me. Is it The Movie Guys? I think so.
Yeah, I said that earlier, and then Epic Movie Guys.
Right? Epic Movie Guys. And I know the one and only Emily Prokop from The Story Behind is on, I believe, at 3:00. So I'm trying to, I have a School of Podcasting roundtable today, I think, at that time. And I'm going to have to remember to go over because I want to donate. I guess it doesn't really matter when you donate, but it'd be cool if I could say, Emily brought in X amount of money during that time. Epic Film Guys. There we go.
Twice I've thought I've had cancer, and both times it wasn't, but it makes you think differently about those kinds of things. I'd heard Emily advertise for that on Story Behind, and I thought, we ought to do that. It was a week. There's only a week in between. Emily, you should do those promos months ahead of time so we can get involved in that. But I always appreciate folks that trying to solve that thing. Because cancer is only going to get worse, and so appreciate their work.
Absolutely. I'm trying to run over and see if I can find the name of it. There is a documentary on a completely non-podcasting related thing. I think it's called The Big Secret, and it talks about how Rockefeller took over the American Medical Association and stopped. It's very conspiracy theory kind of stuff. But explains how, back in the day, we used to cure stuff like polio, and now they just make a pill for everything. And the other thing they've pointed out is since GMOs have been introduced, there's a graph that you look at that and go, oh, that can't be right. Because it just shows where it's like, here's when we used to make our food this way, and then we started doing it this way, and you just watch cancer go through the roof. And the guy's like, this is data. This is not an opinion. This is data. I was like, wow, okay. So I believe it's called The Big Secret or something like that on Amazon Prime. I got sucked into. There's a bunch of. I'm actually getting sucked into documentaries. Period, because they're kind of fun that way. But
Yeah, there's lots of things. There's probably lots of causalities associated with it. We went into the nuclear age. We've, cities have changed. Our drinking water is different. So who knows? Well, the good news is I think it's someday. I think we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So as we support cancer research, I think it's a super important cause.
Yeah. If you have a question, you can jump on in. We're at askthepodcastcoach.com/live. If you want to throw it in the chat room, or if you want to go to askthepodcastcoach.com/join, you can jump right in here onto the video. If you don't want the video, you don't have to turn your camera on. If you want to do it that way, we'd love to hear your questions. And I always go over to the Facebook groups. This is from Podcasters Hangout is where I was at this morning in Facebook. And Sean, I'm just going to say Ray. It's WRAY because it wouldn't be a silent R. I'm like, wait a minute, how's that work?
Silent R.
Yeah. What is the cheapest mic for a setup of two people in the same room to not have latency? And the thing here is cheap. And I thought, because originally I'm thinking an H1, a Zoom H1 or an H2. And then I did a interview once with Fred Castaneda on an H2, and we were on a fairly small table, put that in the middle, and we had it set up where it picks up both sides. And I was surprised how well that turned out without a huge amount of noise. Now we knew that, so we were kind of leaning into the microphone, but some of these Rode now makes lavalier mics too that you can plug into an iPhone. That might be the cheapest way to do it.
You could do it to 2100s in Spreaker Studio. They recognize, Spreaker Studio recognizes those mics, even though they're the same as two different inputs. That's the problem with the PC. So if you already had a PC, I think you could do it that way. That might work.
So, and that's always the fun part of, like, is this people coming to you? It sounds like it, if it's two people, because if it's then remote, then you get into the ringer, squadcast. But if it's two people in front of you, and of course, then there's always the ultimate cheapest is ATR 2100 into your phone with a Bob Barker routine.
Mm-hmm.
Just point it at who's ever talking. There's $70, you're done. So, but the thing is, when you're recording multiple people, especially if they're in the same room, don't sit next to each other, sit across from each other. And I think the other thing you have to realize is, especially if you're listening through podcaster ears and you're just listening to the one track of the guest and you go, I can still hear me. It's because you were in the room. I don't know. There's a way that, unless you have noise gates and all sorts of other things, you're always going to have a little, I think the fun word for that is bleed.
Yeah. And it's not worth it to filter it out. Just go with it. It's fine. Leave it on one track and go, if you can. If you're that worried about it, put them in a different room. Like you have to eliminate. We have to do this at work all the time, and I'll get folks who are going to come in for one of the Gallup podcasts and like, so do I get to be in the studio with you? And I'm like, oh, no, we don't do that. You're going to be in a separate room, and they see that, they feel it's really odd, but it is for me. It eliminates separate rooms, eliminates all kinds of problems, and so it's just easier. And then I can look at them through the monitor. I've been in rooms where we got the monitor, and then you're looking off camera, all the time when you're looking at them. It's a lot easier to have them in separate rooms. So I insist on it. I just don't want to be in the same room. The only time I do that is when we're at, at a conference and I'm interviewing people at a table, and and then it works. Then it's a single track. You're not going for anything. It's loud, noisy.
Right. I think sometimes this seems to be a running theme that I'm starting to hear in my head. Is sometimes I think we overthink this stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we need this and that. And I'm like,
Well, there's so much information on the web about this now, and there's so much confusing information. And then there's so many success gurus, you got to have it this way, and it's got to be that way, and it's got to be done like this, and it's got to be done like that. And they contradict each other. And so it's confusing. I think some people get confused, and they're generally like, look, I just want to record something, and somebody told me that it has to be this way, and I don't know how to do that. So I don't blame them. There's a lot of advice out there.
Well, and there's another great advantage Stephen points out in the chat room. The biggest advantage of not being in the same room, of course, is no pants. Right?
Totally.
That's
Totally. I don't have any
about
pants
that.
on. Are you kidding me?
Uh,
Why would I wear pants to ask the podcast coach?
The one and only black man with a gun, Reverend Ken Blanchard, says, podcast movement question. What should a newbie take to the event? Comfortable shoes
Yeah.
would be one.
Yeah.
Breath mints.
If you have a roommate, you want earplugs.
Yeah. Chapstick. I don't know. I guess because we're talking. Because normally my lips are not chapped, but when I go to an event,
Yeah.
all that hot air coming out.
Change of environment. Change of environment. I think a comfortable backpack so that you can, because you're going to want to carry stuff around, water, stuff that you pick up at sessions, whatever.
Yeah.
So having a comfortable backpack is important. Of course, you have to have a t-shirt to pimp your podcast. So like, make sure you're making those t-shirts now.
Yeah. Business cards. So if somebody says, do you have a card? You have one. I try not to be the business card ninja where it's like, you see somebody, you're like, and they just like, I didn't ask you for a card.
Right in their neck.
And just, for me, I always tell people now, I always go through and figure out what sessions I want to go to when I'm at an actual event that I can actually go to sessions, which is cool because this year they're closing the booths down a day early, which means Thursday I can go to sessions, which will be fun unless Lipson tells me to do something else. But I always figure out where I want to go. And then if I'm having a conversation in a hallway with somebody and it's going good and I'm making a connection and I look down and go, oh, I was going to go see so-and-so, I always stay with the live connection and I'll listen to it on the recording. On occasion, they will have things that don't get recorded. I'm not sure. I understand how that is as from my days of the New Media Expo, but it never fails that somewhere the recording is going to get eaten. And that's usually the one that you really, really wanted to hear. Like I wanted to hear Paul Culligan's from 2 years ago, I think it was, at Podcast Movement. Didn't happen for whatever reason. So
the one that you wanted to hear from Paul, could you have heard that somewhere else?
No, that was,
Really?
It was him talking about, he had a ton of Alexa stats and how Alexa was, going up the ranks and this and that. And I've heard him talk about it, different things. And it was funny because I actually asked him because I was doing a presentation on Alexa and that's why I wanted to hear it. And I said, any chance I could borrow your slides? And he was kind of like joking about it. And then I got the feeling it was kind of like, get your own slides, which I don't blame him. I just said, that's all right. I'll just go listen to your thing. And he goes, no, you won't. I'm like, why? He goes, that didn't get recorded. I was like, oh, doggone it. So,
you could have had him on your podcast though to talk about that, right?
Yeah.
Own personal.
Actually, Edison did a cool, somebody did, I think it was Edison, but somebody did a whole like deep dive into smart speakers. So I found my own stats at the time, but I try to take the lazy way out and get his.
But that in your space, if you missed it, I find most of those speakers have said what they're going to say, or they're going to say it somewhere else. And so
is there's a thing when you fill out to be a speaker, have you presented this anyplace else? And that's kind of a strike against you if you say that. They want new stuff.
But I mean, like you and Ray and Daniel did a roundtable type thing, right? Where you're on there, and I'm not sure you said anything new in there. Now I listened to all three of you, and so I've heard a lot of the stuff that you're going to say. But it definitely, if I was there and I was having a great conversation with someone, and it was that conversation that I could only have there versus a session where I probably have heard that information before. How many of those sessions do we go into looking for confirmation? We already know the answer. We just want to hear someone else say it,
right?
And confirm our own biases. So, I'm with you. I think if you're at the conference and you've made a strategic relationship with somebody and you're having a great conversation, you always prioritize those conversations over sessions.
Yeah, and just drink lots of water to stay hydrated and don't plan on getting a lot of sleep depending on your scenario. I always pretend I'm 22 when I go to those things and I'm staying up till 2 and 3 in the morning and getting up. And, that's pretty much it for me. That's the things that I always wish. And that's the hard thing. Like Jim said with the backpack, I think, cause I used to carry around a laptop and I don't do that. I take a laptop with me because I have to do a presentation. But most of the time now it's iPad and phone. And sometimes I even leave, I just have my phone and I'm taking notes in Evernote on my phone. just so I don't have to carry around something and that whole 9 yards. So, Michael says, hi guys, I have an episode of the podcast that I have a minute and 67 update to it. When I put it on the website, should the update have its own page or the page for the episode? What I would do, who's your media host? Most media hosts will let you just upload the same file. Now here's the tricky thing where we all start to murmur about Google Play Music and Spotify, because there's two ways of doing this. If you upload the exact same file name, iTunes, and for lack of a better phrase, all the other ones, update your file pretty much instantly, because in your feed it says play that file. Well, 1 minute it was the old version, now it's the new version, same name, no need to update it. However, Spotify and Google Play Music. Now, for the record, I almost don't want to talk about Google Play Music because it just isn't. I went over and looked at my stats last night. I've one time got more than 10 downloads in a day, and I know it's dead app walking anyway. So then you have Spotify, which has its own little issues right now as it's updating. But if you upload the same name file, then Spotify is not going to get a new copy of it. So you go, oh, well, I want Spotify. So now when you put you rename it, same post, replace the file, except now it's, my MP3 file B.mp3. Well, now Spotify will pull it. However, for a small period of time, iTunes and all the other ones will when you go to play it, it'll just spin because it's looking for the old file until your feed updates to see that new one. So there's no perfect way to replace a file now. So if you want everybody to get it, you upload a new file and realize you might get an email from somebody saying, hey, I just tried to download your file and I can't. And then you have to tell them, refresh your feed, refresh the website, whatever they're on, and it should get it. So that's the tricky part. The best thing now is, and I do this religiously now, is I listen to the file before I upload it because it's such a pain to replace it now. But that's the joys of the Spotifys and the Google Plays. These places that, God love them, for whatever reason, will not do a pass through and just play the file from your media host. But and I have seen, I heard Rob mention that another way of doing this is if you're using Libsyn, you can go in and say, okay, from the original version, uncheck Spotify. That'll pull that version of the file out of Spotify and then make a new episode only for Spotify. And I'm like, well, you could do that. You're using up your storage space that way, but you could do that. Go in and say, okay, don't send it to anybody else. Just send this new version to Spotify. And since you removed it from the old one and you've added it to this new episode, so the same thing. You could say send it to Spotify and Google Play Music in this version, remove it from that version, and go that route. But it's a hassle now to replace a file on because of those two.
Mm-hmm.
No, Google is not doing, Google Play Music especially isn't, and we're not sure what the new app thing is doing. I guess the new app thing, I'm still kind of like, it's cool, it's fun, but it's also kind of like, now that I went back and looked, that's kind of old news. That's been around for a while. The thing that's weird, and I'm hoping somebody can get to somebody at Google to get an answer, is so now we're talking about the Google search app. And when you do that, it shows little play buttons for your podcast. But in the specs for that, it says we only want one RSS feed listed in the header of your website. Well, by default, WordPress has two, one for the feed and one for the comments. That's already in your feed. So now the question is, and there's a plugin that if you want, you can do it. You could say, please disable the built-in feeds, and then you could add this other one to your code. The question is, do we have to do that? And there's no Rob Greenlee from Google that we can just email and say, I know there's that Zach guy, but I'm like, we need that answered. Like, how strictly is that we only want one RSS feed in your header? And I don't know who to ask that to. I would love to get that answered, because
Google needs a podcast, don't they?
They do.
They need a podcast about their podcasts.
Yeah.
Let people know what's going on. It's super helpful. I think every company should be required to have podcasts about their product. Just so helpful to like know what's going on and hear what's going on from them and what are the latest updates, those kinds of things.
Yeah. And then what happens if you have a network, and now you've got one website with multiple podcasts on it? How does that work? So, and there's just nobody to kind of go, hey, Google, like, what's the deal with that? How's that going to work? How's that going to, I'm surprised. I thought about that this morning because Audio Boom, if you haven't heard, apparently is in a world of hurt. I will throw this in chat room. I just thought about it. I'm like, there's another podcast hosting company that has a lot of money apparently, or did, but in this Inside Radio article, it says in announcing the withdrawal, because they were going to buy Triton Digital for like, I don't know, $1 gazillion. And said Audio Boom said it only has enough working capital to continue operations for 4 weeks. Yikes. Depending on how much money comes in the 4 weeks that you're operating, shares in Audio Boom remain suspended on the London Stock Exchange, pending further fundraising. Which to me, I'm like, they got to go raise funds. Well, I guess so. If you only got 4 weeks worth of money,
something doesn't smell right there.
Yeah. Why? When they said they were gonna buy Triton for this, like it was something like $1 billion or something like that, I'm like, wait, where'd they get that kind of money?
Well, an investor pulled out is what happened probably in this case, is they had a high profile investor or a big deep pockets investor, and at the very last minute, that investor pulled out. And nobody, lots of times that happens and nobody knows who the investor is. They don't want to be known. They want to live behind the scenes. And in this case, because it smells too much like, hey, we're doing great. We're going to make this big purchase. We have all the money in the world. Oh, except today we don't. And so I'd bet a good amount of money that they had a big investor pull out or decommit. And now they're like, oh crap, everything, we had bet the farm on this thing and now the funding's not there. We actually only have enough money for 4 weeks. That's a little scary.
Yeah.
That's not great planning. Their board, it should be held responsible for this.
Well, that, and I've seen them be like a platinum sponsor at Podcast Movement. And I think they actually had a booth last year at Podcast Movement, but I didn't get, it's one of the few companies I've never met. And I think I could have last year. And then the problem is now and I don't mean this in a negative way, but I'm tied to a booth now when I go to Podcast Movement. Right. Yeah. And so I can't float around as much as I could.
Well, an Audio Boom had gone to a complete paid structure. They had a free plan. They were Audio Boo, remember? And they tried to be those short audio snippets. And way back in the day, they became Audio Boom. Got a few podcasters that had some names. They did some things. They changed their website. They went pay only, which is what you like, Dave. So, they were doing all the right things. I am a little surprised the end is coming this fast for them. I mean, they had done what I thought everything they needed to do to be sustainable. They had reached out to me, 3-4 years ago and offered me a pretty sweet deal on there to host my podcast there. And I had a person I would talk to, and they did some custom work for me, and it was pretty cool. And so and then in the newest price change, they kicked everybody off the free plans, and me included, even though I had one of their, their podcast or their podcast pro plans is kind of what I had. And they no phone calls or whatever. And I didn't expect it, but I thought, okay, well, they're getting big time, but apparently it doesn't take long to run out of money when you spend it. We talked about this. Did we talk about this when you're doing big promotional events, right? And you're doing $40 a seat and you have, $250,000 a night, but it doesn't take long when you think about promotions and when you think about the venue and some of those kinds of things. You ask Rob or Todd or the other Rob at Spreaker, it's expensive to run these things. We think at $20 a plan, man, that's a lot of money. Are you kidding me? Do you really know how expensive it is? They're hoping that they'll get people who pay $20 and use 3 of it, so they cover the person who spends $20 and it costs them 50. So. Cash flow is king, is what Mike says out in the chat room.
Yeah, I was looking to see if they had wait a minute. Become a sponsor. Okay, so there's no pricing. I wanted to see what Audio Boom, because they're their platinum sponsor for Podcast Movement.
Right.
And it's interesting because there are some names there I've never heard of. Wildfire Radio. Castbox, I've heard of them. Fiverr's going to be there. Art19, Self Publishing School. They were at Social Media Marketing World. Stream Guys, TalkShoe. Oh my God, they're still around? That's amazing. Let's see.
These are the sponsors.
Yeah, those are bronze sponsors. Oh, wait a minute. I take that back. Castbox is sponsoring a Wednesday night party. Acuity Scheduling, so they're sponsoring different things. The Network Lounge is sponsored by Acuity Scheduling. Mobile app sponsors Podfly. TalkShoe is part of the Podcast Pavilion. I'm really surprised they're still around. iHeartRadio is doing the Hall of Fame red carpet party. Have they announced the Hall of Fame yet?
Not that I've heard.
Yeah. So, but that would be, I just know a platinum sponsor that's not like a buy one, get one free situation. So be interesting to see. But speaking of that leads in nicely to audio things that searches and things like that. I'll throw.
Oh, Dave, I lost your audio. That's right. Just pop it in and pop it back. Pop it out. Nope. No. No, your gate got really aggressive, or something got aggressive on your, and then away you went. We'll see if we can get you back in here. Haha, I run the show now. Well, Dave, there you go. You're back.
Okay. I was going to, what I was looking for, because I was going to, somewhere in that giant list that I have is the iMic. I was like, why am I just not using what I used to use? But there's this place called Audio Burst. And I'm just kind of like, it's one of those where I'm like, I don't see a business plan, but it's personalized audio on demand, re-imaging the way people discover and experience audio content. Creates a listening identity based on the user's unique listening patterns, interests, and preferences. You mean like, I don't know, Pandora or Spotify?
Right.
Keep them listening while they exercise. And it shows the fact that, listening is Karen. She's 42. She's in Jacksonville, Florida. She's connected via a car. The average listening time is 32 minutes. Topics of interest might be local news, lifestyle, and finance. So I get the idea of maybe she could listen to podcasts or Bloomberg Radio, but this is one of those again where I'm like, okay, if we're worried about privacy, this is all based on you. I don't know, the whole thing. I just like, and then their some of their partners are Bose and Braggy and Radio Online and Smart News, and I'm like, I've never heard of any of those. And Info Reader, and if you go to the broadcast page, partner with us, index your content to search engines and apps, dominate the conversation, has the largest and growing audio library centered around meta tagging, which makes your content searchable by keyword. And with our automated transcription, people can find bursts from your shows in real time. Monetize, because bursts are easily searched, shared, and credited, collected, and linked to their original long form source. Your content has the ability to reach new heights. Discover new ways to distribute and monetize your content through promotions, sponsored playlists, and personalized offers. So it just seems, I'm like, well, okay, here we go.
Hold on. The echo go. I'm getting a weird echo all of a sudden. I think it's me. Okay, good. We're back. It's sometimes if I back away from the mic for a while and then I come back in, I noticed it'll echo for us. Their VP of Business Development, his name's Yanni, so I'm in right now. Any company that has a guy that's name is Yanni, I'm in.
But I guess for me, when I go to this and I go, well, okay, how do I, like, if I want to play with this now, I don't know that there's an app. They say there's experience Audio Burst. What the world is talking about now.
Flaw in its website allowed outsiders to pinpoint the location.
Okay, so
got a little news there.
Yeah. So it's an app based. All right, maybe we'll have to play with it. To me, it's one of those things that's trying to solve the search or the findability or whatever thing. But Steven says, but the question is, does Pandora or Spotify have an opening page with youthful looking girl with purple headphones, color coordinated to match their scarf, looking half interested in what she is seeing out of the car service when that's true. They don't. So, and Spotify isn't making money yet. I heard a report on, I think it was Pod News, and they made like X amount of $1 billion last year, but they're still not profitable. And I'm like, that's sad because musicians aren't making any money on that thing. I'm like, somebody's not crossing the T or dotting an I over there. I'm not sure, but it should be interesting.
That is an exact picture. Oh, why is that working that way? Can you hear the echo when I do that? Just must be on my end. I don't know. Chat room, are you hearing that when I come back in? That's weird. You know, sometimes the audio will expand on Google when you're using Hangouts. If I'm not there, there's just enough of a hint of sound. It's trying to find it, and then when you come back in, that echo happens. So I don't know. That's weird. Stephen was talking about that the picture of that girl looking out the window, disinterested. That's my daughter, by the way. She looks exactly like that when she's in the car. She sits in the back, she puts her headphones on, she doesn't want to talk to us, and she just stares out the window like this is the most boring place ever. So I wonder, maybe I'll have to mute my mic when I'm not talking to see if that fixes it. We'll see.
I'm not sure. It is 11 o'clock, so it's time to thank the patrons, awesome people like Josh Liston over at shannaraworld.com and tpsguide.org. And our $20 donators are Greg from depthshepherd.com, Jonathan from weeklyawesome.com, Glenn the Geek Hebert from horseradionetwork.com, Josh Rivers from podcastingexperiments.com, Max Truscott over at aviationnewstalk.com, and Shane from spybrary.com. Thank you for being an awesome supporter of the askthepodcastcoach.com. If you'd like to be an awesome supporter, go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And here's an interesting, I thought this was an interesting conversation from a guy named Jeremy Staes, Staes. He says, as a space, which I'm so happy he didn't say the podosphere. When I hear people say that, I cringe a little. I'm like, that's just too nerdy for me. He says, seems there's clearly an app gap. What is the podcast app gap that no one has heard of, that people should know about, or has it not been built yet? So he's kind of saying we need a different app. I feel like there's a lot of work and opportunity around this part of the distribution chain to make it as easy as Netflix or Hulu. Here's my story that prompts this. Was at large day-long family event yesterday. So I was at a large day-long family event yesterday and found out cousins and uncles were listening to my shows, but found out that all of them went to the website to listen or links in my regular email. They all said podcasting apps are too hard to figure out, especially for those on Android, with an honestly only family that loves you can give you. Not sure. Oh, with an honesty, only family that loves you can give you. Okay, I get that.
Commas are helpful.
Yeah, those that do listen to podcasts do so through dedicated apps like Mark Maron. I run a local online news outlet, and I've heard the same thing out at charity events and conferences. These aren't technologically stupid people. One is a former aircraft controller and jet pilot in his early 40s, and even he can't figure out podcast apps on his Android. I've laid plans to do a dedicated app because it's clear I need to do that for now. And for us, it's early and we're still building our shows. I've talked to some others and I found two camps that apps don't matter, and others that more than half their downloads are through dedicated apps, especially those who serve folks I affectionately call normies. Thoughts, experiences. This is not an app issue, but an issue. This not an app issue, but an issue marketing the podcast space overall. Am I crazy? Thanks in advance. Again, this is from, and I tried to see what Jeremy's podcast was, and because it was on Facebook and I'm not his friend, I couldn't see. I guess.
We lost it. We just lost it again. Hold on. Yeah, that's weird. It's like it's reaching a point and then it just drops off. That is the weirdest thing. Why it's doing that? You're back.
Yes, I've switched to iMic. I found it. I was like, oh, okay,
good. Maybe
problem.
That'll fix it.
So, in fact, let's just do that live, shall we? This would be a fun little thing. I'm gonna Google Jeremy Staes podcast and see. And how to successfully promote your podcast to get more listeners. I do not see a pod here. Jeremy Stays. I see him on Twitter. Nope, I see Jeremiah Stays, and it is, well, that's his name. Well, hold on, make sure I got the right thing. Yeah, Jeremiah Stays. Okay, so let's assume he's on Twitter. I'm gonna open up his Twitter now. Can you see somebody trying to do this? I'm trying to find his podcast, and on his podcast, he has no, on his Twitter account, he has no link to his website. So I know his cousins are listening on his website, but Daily Detroit, he did say he had a news outlet, but on here this is my point. He's got a podcast. Sign up for the newsletter. Topics. There's nothing here on his website. Let me scroll down here. Let's just do this. Normally I don't do things that are visual, but this is his website, dailydetroit.com. And when I look at it, for those of you who are listening on audio, he's got a bunch of, it's what you would call a magazine style website. Lots of pictures with lots of articles because it's about Detroit. But nowhere on here is a subscribe button, 0. And so if I click on the podcast button at the top of the screen, I see listen to the stories of our Motor City Through podcast. And he's got different, now here's links. Okay. But on the front page, there weren't anything. And I see follow on Spotify, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, listen to Stitcher. So at least he has subscribe buttons. So that's good. I was just worried that there weren't going to be any subscribe buttons because I see that a lot.
Is his podcast called Daily Detroit?
Let's see. Daily Detroit News Bite is your daily podcast that connects you to Metro Detroit. Served up by the Daily Detroit team. We keep you in touch with what to know and where to go in a 12 to 15 minute show that fits your business, your busy lifestyle. Yeah. So.
I do agree with this premise. I think you should have your own dedicated app. I mean, so for Home Gadget Geeks, I have homegadgetgeeks.com. That takes you to a page that goes to our dedicated app. And then the site is, theaverageguy.tv, and it has a bunch of different podcasts on it. That was the platform. I do think for each one of those shows, you should have a dedicated app as well as distributing to Spotify and iHeartRadio and all those other places, right, that you distribute to. Because you're gonna, like, for those, in those cases, you're gonna run into people who they want one button push. They don't want to go to Overcast or any of those other podcast players and have to deal with the complexity of the player. I don't find them complex, but they are fairly complex, right? They're written for people who want to watch a lot or listen to a lot of podcasts. So the answer is you have to do both. You have to have both be distributed everywhere. And I think it's super smart to have your own podcast app. I've had mine sponsored by LastPass for the last 3 years. And I think I'll probably ask him again. I think this will probably be the last year they'll do it. I'll probably ask one more time. It cost me $200 on Spreaker to have those available out there. So not terribly expensive. They cover it, and plus a little bit more for advertising. So that's the way I do it. But so, yeah, I think you got to I think everybody should have their own app that's easy to get to and easy to use.
Yeah. Emily says, I've started showing people how to ask Siri or Google or the Amazon Echo to play the podcast for family members who they just don't get it. And that's the thing that dawned on me. I always remember this. Anytime somebody goes, will you teach me how to play the guitar? And I'll set up guitar lessons. And because I've been doing it so long, I just forget what it's like to not know E, A, D, G, B, E, because those are the 6 strings and this is an F and that's a G. And so when you're teaching it how to hold a pick, that's the one that always gets me. They're like, okay, well, how do I'm like, well, it's this, and they're like, okay, but do I want to hold it like this or with my pinky? Or like, no, it's these 2 fingers, all these things that because you've been podcasting and you've got it. You forget that I think this person called them normies. They don't. And so that's where the other thing I want to do, I'm with Emily. I have a video on my one website where first of all, I have a subscribe button. I have a subscribe page with everything is on one page. And then I have a video at the top, which I now need to update because Apple Podcasts is changed a little bit. But now that I have an Android device, you can make screenshots by same thing it is on an iPad. You hold down the power button and the home button and you can take a screenshot. And then it's, just a matter of getting the screenshots off your device. And I want to make step by step. Jordan Harbinger has on his page, he has screenshots. Click here, type this, do this. He walks people exactly how to subscribe, and I think that's something we all need to do to get people to do that. Steven wants to open a can of worms. You want to open up a can of worms, Jim?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay, says the largely accepted definition of a podcast comes down to distribution through an RSS feed. If someone makes a podcast app that integrates through their company service website directly to push the content down to the app rather than the app hitting the RSS feed, by former logic, is it still technically a podcast? I would say no, technically.
I would say who cares?
Yeah.
Like, why does it matter?
Yeah. We also had a question from Darwin Dave. Is there a huge difference between recording between 44.1 and 48,000 hertz? I'm using an H6. If you ask Chris Curran, he'll say, "Oh, are you kidding me?" Absolutely. And there is. It's more, you're capturing more data. The thing that I hate is when I bring in a audio from 48 hertz and then I bring in music that's recorded at 44.1, somebody's got to get converted because you can't have two sample rates in Audition. I believe that's the one where it always goes, "Hey, wait a minute, we need to update this first," which is not a huge deal. You go, okay, and then you watch the little progress bar and it's good to go. But after every time I brought in something, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to record at 44.1. As always, record both and then vote with your ears.
Did you purposely move away from the can of worms question? Like we gave it like 5 seconds and then you moved on to the hertz. Does it with podcasts, Stephen talking about if you're running, say, and let's make the example even easier. Like, so there's people who are creating YouTube videos that they're calling podcast. That's their podcast. That's what they're calling it. They're calling it their podcasts. And the podcast purists are just freaking out because it's like, it's not a podcast and you can't call it that and get off my lawn.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm a big fan of content creator. Yeah. I think we're all content creators. I deliver mine via podcast. That person delivers their via radio. They deliver their content via blogger. No, I just heard you say, "Who cares?" And I went, "Oh, okay."
Oh, okay, all right. So I didn't know if that was like, wow, we shut that one down.
Moving on. Well,
sorry about that.
It is a can, and there are those people that are gonna go, "It's still a podcast," and I'm like, "Oh, call it what you want." I just go, "Can we just call it content and be happy with that?"
Well, but I think there's some advantages to calling it a podcast though, because the podcast is taking on a name like Kleenex or like aspirin or like, right. As much as we hated it, it's the wrong title. No, like, why is it pod? Because it was right. It came off the the Apple device that started with that, right? And for the longest time, that name recognition wasn't there. But I think we're finally getting to a point where the term podcast is being known by more and more, and it's making more and more sense. And I think it represents this alternative method of delivering content in a way that's easy and convenient for a listener to pick up on their new media devices, whatever that is, right? Whether it's a phone or watch it online or watch it on Hulu or watch it on their, on their devices, on their television or whatever. And I think that name podcast is starting to catch for that. And I don't think we should minimize it. I think we should expand it to be whatever it needs to be for people consuming that content. And so I don't agree that, I don't know if we should narrow the definition of it just for purity's sake or just because, no, it has to have an RSS feed. Does it?
Because you think about it, that case, they're consuming audio content via an app. Okay, so the only difference is the fact there's no RSS feed. I'm with you in that case. I'm like, look, if you want to call it a podcast, you go right ahead. Yeah. I know it's not a podcast, but I don't.
But Dave, why does that matter?
I don't. But that's the whole thing.
What benefit do you get for it not being a podcast when
the people that listen could care less?
Totally.
Yeah. So that's what I'm like. You know what? You go right ahead and call it a podcast. I know it's not a podcast.
When we first started doing when we first started doing Called to Coach at Gallup, my VP said, "You can't call it a podcast." I'm like, he's like, nobody knows what that means, and it was probably true. It's 6 years ago, and 6 years ago, it's probably true. Nobody didn't. So we went through some names and we landed on Webcast. It's kind of like Leo landing
Right.
on Netcast,
Netcast.
right? So we landed on webcasting, and I taught my audience what a webcast is. I actually do think it's a better word than podcasting, but okay.
Right.
So we landed on webcast. Well, over the last couple of years, I've had people say, well, how come you say webcast and not podcast? Everything is just a podcast. So we've actually been, over the last 2 years, reteaching them through, I have a little bit in my script that says, you can subscribe or you can download or subscribe to this content, on your phone. We call that podcasting. And I've been changing that. I've been trying to teach them, hey, this is just a podcast and you can get it however you want in any method you want. So we're making that switch. The weird thing is our channel is called Gallup Webcasts. And I don't know, like Leo's locked into the Netcast idea.
Right.
I'm a little locked into webcasts because everything is titled that way. We have tons of stuff that's got it embedded in it. So I don't know. It's going to be it'll be a challenge to get that out. I just don't see, I don't get the kind of the purist side of this. I think you land, Dave, a little bit more on that side of like, well, I know it's technically not a podcast. And you're like, well,
I just think we should all, the problem is we're labeling podcast as content creators. And that's the problem. We shouldn't have been calling ourselves podcasters. We should have been calling ourselves content creators.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. Yeah, totally.
So that's the problem. Ryan says, how do we feel about internet radio? I use it all the time. If I'm talking to people over 50, they're like, what's a podcast? It goes kind of like radio, but it's over the internet. Because if I say, delivered via an RSS feed and, enclosures of the MP3, they're like
totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. All those words work, right? In the space.
Yeah.
I think you tailor it to your audience. What's gonna do it for them? What's gonna work?
Well, when I was on Golden Opportunities, the TV show here in Cleveland, that's geared for people that are retired, and they wanted me to explain podcasting, and I was like, "How about this?" And they're like, "Nope." I'm like, "What how about internet radio?" Yeah, that'll work. Okay, good. So they just kept going down and down to try to find something that would work, and they're like, yeah, that's still too geeky.
Well, but those names take on. I mean, think about the term DJ. Like that doesn't say anything about radio in it. That doesn't say anything about what it is and what is a disc jockey.
Right.
Like, what is that? Right. But that term, if you, at least anybody in America, if you said I'm a DJ, well, then that even actually that term has morphed over the last 20 years too, as well. But
because now it's a guy that's going wicca with the records and
yeah, where it used to be you were a radio guy,
yeah,
you were a DJ, right? And so those terms change. Yeah. I think we're going to continue to be in a changing landscape around that. I really do think it's to our advantage to use that term podcasting. I don't think it's a disadvantage, but I think you're right. You need to change it kind of based on your audience.
Yeah.
But it won't be very long, Dave, though, between those 50 to 70-year-olds are gone.
Yeah.
And you know what I'm saying? I mean, it too will take on a new and some new words or some new flavors when we get there.
I'm trying behind the scenes here to they actually answered this question on a TV show recently. And in 2 seconds, I will play you. Actually, I think I can play that. Oh, wait, I need to click on that button and move it to the Ask the Podcast Coach playlist. I'm using iJingle in case anybody cares. But now in theory, I can go back and at the very bottom, should have my answer. Here we go. What is a podcast? You ready?
Oh, God.
Does anyone know what a podcast is?
It's radio on the internet.
You can't hear that, can you?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, hold on. I talked over it.
Yeah, do it again.
Does anyone know what a podcast is?
It's radio on the internet. My mom listens to them, and they're totally boring.
I'm not sure you guys heard that.
Yeah, one more time. It needed just to be turned up a little bit.
Does anyone know what a podcast is?
It's radio on the internet. My mom listens to them, and they're totally boring.
There we go. It's radio on the internet. My mom listens. And now
all those nerds are out there talking about what the definition of a podcast is.
So that from the now canceled Alex Inc. rest in peace. I don't know how many more episodes we're going to get to see those.
I think if I went to work and I asked any of the employees that I work with, both technical and non-technical, what's a podcast? I think they would all know that it's content, right? They'd say it in different ways, but no one would go, I've never heard that term before. So I think we are probably getting close in most circles to 100% penetration of the word. At least they know what the word is. Now, if you ask them, have you ever listened or do you know how to listen? I think those numbers drop pretty drastically. But, there is no doubt. Now, that could be skewed a little bit because all the people around me know of the Gallup podcast. Right. And so, it could be that because of my work situation, they're a little more educated than most. But Dave, don't you think? I mean, I think there's very few people, if you said, have you ever not heard the word podcast? I think everybody at least has an idea. It's some kind of content available to you on that, you know.
Well, my neighbor next door is 64-ish, something like that. He's in his 60s, and he didn't even have a smartphone. His mom is, I think, 92, and he always just kind of joking. He says, "How is everything in podcast land?" He's like, I kind of explained to him again, internet radio,
right,
broadcast, blah blah,
right.
But yeah, that's and he just kind of like, yeah, you young kids and your internet stuff. He's pretty funny actually. But I should ask my niece. My niece is in her 20s, probably pushing 30. I should ask her, have you ever listened to a podcast? Do you even know what they are? Because she lives on her phone, so that would be interesting.
Oh, have you ever listened to one is a completely different conversation than do you know what they are?
It is, yeah.
Right. And I think folks have some idea. What's interesting is when in Serial had this effect on people is that there was a whole group of people who didn't care until Serial hit. Then all of a sudden it was something really interesting and they knew tons of stuff about it. It was like cryptocurrency. Like nobody knew anything about it until Bitcoin got actually expensive. Then all of a sudden everybody knew something about it because it was interesting. It had something to latch onto. There was a motivation to understand it or to know it. And so we're just going to kind of continue to need, by the way, we haven't had a Serial hit in a while. I mean, there isn't right now, there isn't a flagship podcast out there. Marin was doing it for a while, but he has died down. The NPR groups were doing it for a while and they've kind of died down. There really isn't a flagship podcast out there.
The only one that I have had a bunch of people tell me about, and it was, again, it's in our little podcasting bubble, was a very fatal murder. And that was put on by The Onion. And it was a spoof of Serial and all the true crime stuff. That's hilarious. If you haven't listened, it's like 6 episodes. It's I almost want to listen to it again just for the commercials. They were awesome. Emily has a great point that she's listening to podcasts in the car with a kid. And so that's going to be interesting, is the generation that's growing up not listening to the radio and just listening to podcasts or listening to whatever they want. My favorite quote is Paul Culligan said he was in his car with his daughter who was probably 9, I think at the time, or something like that. And she grew up with an iPod and they forgot their phone and they forgot their iPod. He goes, well, that's all right. We'll listen to radio. And she actually said, what's radio? And he goes, oh, it's in the car. You turn it on and these other people play the music for you. And she said, why would we do that? Like, why would I want somebody else to play music for me? Why would I let them pick the music? And he said it was just so bizarre to have her go, like, what's radio? Like, she had no clue. Yeah. I did not. Emily says, have you seen the map of the most popular podcast by state? It surprised me that Connecticut was Mark Maron. Yeah, but isn't Connecticut more? Oh, here we go. I don't use the L word.
Don't say it.
Yeah. Aren't they more democratic, shall we say? Yeah, Lore seemed to go big. Yeah, I saw where they canceled Alex Inc. Alex Inc. wasn't. Here's the thing. It wasn't geeky enough. They weren't really. I thought they were going to bring the story of startup to life. And that's more of a documentary. This is a family comedy. So you had a lot of episodes about homework that, and then the fact that Zach Braff, whatever, is using a microphone You know, he might as well have been talking into it like this. It was just, he was not even close. He was talking into the back end of it or whatever. That true podcasters, like we wouldn't use it that way. So it wasn't nerdy enough for the podcasters. And it was, to me, it was like this close to a Disney show.
Yeah. Well, that was the beauty of Marin, right? That
Yeah.
it was actually him, and it showed him actually podcasting correctly. And it, and then there were stories around it. And I think it was much truer. I think that show was much truer to podcasting than Alex was. And it doesn't surprise me. They kind of washed it like everything else they do in Disney. They kind of watered it down and washed it down to kind of make it clean and family friendly. And that's not bad. Okay. But that just, it's, I don't know. It's just, it's nothing interesting about that.
In the same way that Roseanne is based around a family where Roseanne doesn't have a job. And Dan kind of does whatever he can to scrape by. If we looked at whatever Kevin Can Wait or whatever Kevin James is, he's usually a UPS driver guy or something or whatever he is. That's as much as podcasting was in. It's what he did for his job. And the other thing they did pretty regularly was they really poo-pooed podcasting. That was the part I'm kind of like, I'm not really sad to see that, because they're like, well, Dad left his real job to do this crazy thing, which it is crazy to leave your day job for a podcast, but they really just pooped all over.
It's no more crazy than a bunch of college students who created a website to connect people together, a hot or not, on the internet, right? Which is now Facebook. So, that's a little, you're a little presumptuous when you start saying, well, that's kind of crazy. I mean, I get it, but we have a bunch of people who have created businesses around Pat Flynn or Michael Hyatt or some of these guys that are John Lee Dumas that are being very, very successful. Is their whole business plan a podcast? No, but a podcast is a big part of what they're doing to make it happen. That's my job at Gallup. And, so you're like, could you, I didn't have to quit my job to go do it. That's the cool thing about it. But I don't think it's that crazy anymore to think like, to be a podcaster and have it be your full-time job. I don't think that's crazy anymore. We have plenty of examples where it's working.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see how many people start a podcast and then go out to find funding. Like, well, I just need an angel investor to give me $10,000 or $20,000 a year while I get this thing off the ground. I'm like, I don't know that that's, when you're not.
That depends on the business model, right?
Yeah.
What problem are you solving, right? And so John Lee Dumas was solving an entrepreneurial problem. In other words, we had a whole bunch of people. By the way, at Gallup, we support this 100% on what he's doing. It's like we're losing more jobs in the United States than we're creating. We need entrepreneurs to create new businesses. We need that to happen, right? And so he created this show that created this energy that helped entrepreneurs keep going. It was a need. It was out there. He was solving a problem Pat Flynn was solving the problem of how do you turn this passive income on in what you're doing? And look how easy it is. I did it. It's not actually that easy, to be honest, but they were all solving problems. I think if you come at this from the question of, this is where, if you're a hobby podcast and you're just talking about, well, let me pick on the film guys, since the Epic Film guys, since we talked about that early. If you're just getting on and just blabbing about movies and you're not solving any problems for people, well, I don't know. Will you be successful? Maybe, but I don't think you will. But if you're getting on and you're being interesting and you're solving a problem or being entertaining in this case, well, okay, maybe there's something there, and you've got to be solving some kind of problem or providing entertainment in some way or whatever. And, if it makes money, well, then maybe you got a shot at it.
Yeah. Then good on you. You got to try. That's the thing.
You do. You won't fail until you try.
Yeah, only one way to know. So, but man, I look at the time, and this is where I'm trying to do this without blasting off your head. If I turn this knob,
I don't hear it yet.
Oh, you know why? Because I didn't hit play. I thought I hit
there
play.
you go.
There we go. Oh, except I hit the wrong one. That's all right.
There we go. Perfect. Perfect.
But we're going to stick around. We're going to talk about is podcasting. What was the question we had? How difficult is it to start a podcast? Somebody asked that question. But Jim, what's coming up on the Home Gadget Geeks?
Yeah, Home Gadget Geeks over at theaverageguy.tv. I took a week off. Yes, you can take a week off
What?
as a podcaster. I made that decision Thursday morning. So yes, you can take a day off and survive. So we still have the episode with Michael Librant where we talked about the air fryer and some the Ember mug out there. If you want to watch it, theaverageguy.tv.
Nice. And this week, I'm finally unveiling my interview with Harry Duran from Podcast Junkies. I've put that back in the oven, and I went back and dissected, like, why do I listen to Harry's show? Like, why, he's not telling me how to grow my audience. Why do I listen to the show? And I finally figured it out, and I will reveal that Monday on the School of Podcasting. So I want to thank everyone in the chat room for, that's a great tone. That's my microphone stand.
B flat.
Yeah.
B flat.
Thanks everyone in the chat room for hanging around. We are here every Saturday, 10:30 Eastern. That's all I'm saying. Eastern. AskThePodcastCoach.com/live or AskThePodcastCoach.com/join if you want to jump in. And thanks for listening. And I still have 37 seconds. Holy cow.
Man. What are we going to do in 37 seconds, Dave?
I don't know.
We could wax eloquently about, so how do you define, Stargate Pioneer asked, how do you define success? We'll talk about that in the post show. How's
That's
that sound?
it. I like that. See, 22 seconds already down.
That's it? Boom.
If you see Deadpool, stay to the very, very end. Some of the funniest clips are in the credits.
All right.
There's one that's hilarious that I was like, I can't believe they just did that. So thank you so much.